Today we are here going to speak about the summary of the book, Ways of Seeing by John Berger. So let's start.
Hi guys, seeing comes before word. The child looks and recognizes it before it can speak. There are various objects, there are various ways of seeing objects, and it depends on what we see and how we see it, more than and what we think. You can always think a horse as a door and anything. An image is not only a sight, it can also be taken as a photograph, a painting, or what. It can be recreated and reproduced various ways using different objects and components. Two-volume study was published on Franz Hals. Here the composition is written as if it was emotional charge of the painting, using terms like harmonious fusion, unforgettable contrast, and reaching a peak of breadth and strength transfer the emotion provoked by the image from a plane of lived experience. One is left with unchanging human condition and the painting considered as a marvelously made object. After the invention of the camera, this contradiction gradually became apparent. Reproduction. Berger argues that reproduction impacts images by bringing them into new contexts, opening up new and more often more democratic possibilities for their interpretation. So a photo can be reproduced into many ways, and the context can change for each and every painting or photo. You can always go to a gallery or a museum and you can see the reproduced product, and you can always find what is different from the original one. So there are different meanings to each reproduced image. Yeah, reproduction isolates a detail. It's actually like cropping, and when you crop the girl, it totally changes the context. A whole picture becomes a portrait of a girl.
According to usage and conventions at the time, a man's social presence is dependent on the power which he holds. This power suggests what he is capable of doing to you or for you, therefore referring to objects that are exterior to him. By contrast, a woman's presence is defined by what can or cannot be done to her. John states that to be born a woman has been to be born into the keeping of men. She must continuously watch herself, or to simplify, men act and women appear. Thus she is turned into an object, a sight. The first nudes in the tradition depicted Adam and Eve. In this story, man and woman are unable to differentiate between right and wrong up until they eat a fruit that they were told not to eat and they become aware of their nakedness. The blame is placed on the woman and she becomes subservient to the man. In the beginning, these types of paintings depicted shame, later becoming a kind of display. The nudity of women as seen by the viewer became a recurring theme. In the average European oil painting, the viewer is not painted, but assumed to be a man. Everything is addressed to him. It is for him that the figures have assumed their nudity. This absurdity peaked in the 19th century. In other traditions, such as Indian Persian art, the theme is usually sexual attraction, love between two people. There are, however, a few exceptions in European oil paintings. Take, for example, Helene Firmin in A Fur Coat by Rubens. Her body confronts us not as an immediate sight, but as the painter's experience. Manet expressed a turning point with his Olympia. When compared with the Venus by Titan, one sees a woman beginning to question that traditional role. There was, however, little to replace it, except the realism of the prostitute, who became the woman of early avant-garde 20th century painting. Thus, in academic painting, the tradition continued.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lorna, and I'll be presenting the first half of chapter 5. Oil paintings usually showcases things that are often viable, but to have a thing as a painting is very different from having it and putting it in your house. So this analogy of possessing something and seeing something is found in oil painting. The term oil painting refers to more than a technique, but rather an art form. Mixing pigments with oil has been around for ages, but its practicality as an art form wasn't in existence until the 1500s. It wasn't fully in use until the 1600s, and as emphasized the start of the era of oil painting. The end of the era of oil painting hasn't been dated exactly, but it has said to be in prime as traditional art form during the 1500s to the 1900s. I'm not indicating that oil painting is no longer in use. It is in use, but the tradition has been ceased. And our history taught us that art prospers when individuals in a society has a love for art. So, what did the author mean by that statement? So, with this tradition of oil painting, love of art comes to stand for the desire to possess. So, this is illustrated with the painting of an art collector amongst his vast collection of paintings. So, in this logic, paintings are, before anything else, objects to be owned. And the contents of these paintings depict then exist as images which the collector may possess. So, since, like I said, this tradition was prime during the 1500s to the 1900s, this logic was related to capitalism in Europe at that time. And the possibility of owning objects depicted in oil painting showed the ruling classes or nobilty's desire to showcase their capital. And as time goes by, the tradition of oil painting ceased, and most of these oil paintings have only a few of them have been collected and preserved, but only a few of these are considered a masterpiece. So, what makes oil painting a masterpiece, and what makes it modern art? So, what this characterizes the large number of average works to the author. This comes from the fact that average oil painting implicates this tradition as hack work. So, this hack work means to express, rather than expressing any particular values or morals through their painting, all the painter wanted to do was to sell the painting and keep their profits. So this is what made any piece a masterpiece or a moderate art. Sorry. And the objects in this painting has immaculate detail and precision, so that the viewer feels like as they gaze through these paintings, they can reach out and touch them. And but however, if you look at it, there's a skull, and metaphorically speaking, it looks like looming death, but otherwise, it looks like a regular human skull. So this contradiction exists in most of oil paintings, can be considered as a con. This contradiction is also seen in the paintings of Mary Magdalene. Her story says that she was so loved of Christ that she represented her past and came to accept the morality of flesh and the immortality of soul. Yet these two paintings contradict the statement. Yeah, that's it.
Good morning everyone, I'm Shritaksha and I'm doing the second half of the fifth chapter. There are various genres in oil painting and some of which include still life. In Berger's view, amount to simple demonstration of what gold or money could buy. The same is true for paintings of animals and buildings, both of which tend to choose their subject matter for its association with social status, rather than depicting natural beauty. Next slide. The category within oil painting considered to be highest was the mythological or historical paintings because they were circulated amongst the elite. Next slide, please. However, one category of oil painting deviates from the tradition is the landscape painting because during that era, nature wasn't yet subjected to the activities of capitalism and could never be possessed and rendered as a tangible object. Next slide. Thus, landscape, which began in Holland in 17th century, remained independent from the oil painting tradition. But some of the exceptions exist, such as Gaysen-Burroughs, Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. Next slide. The painting depicts a wealthy couple amongst a beautiful landscape. for their love of nature, but it was actually glamorizing their land ownership. Next slide. Berger then claims that the essential character of the oil painting is almost universally misunderstood, and it happened so because certain masters like Rembrandt and Vermeer broke free of their typical boundaries. To separate oneself from this tradition requires enormous amount of effort, and Rembrandt was successful in doing so. Next slide. He compares two self-portraits. The first painter was painted when he was 28 according to the tradition and depicts nominally happy subjects, but it also conveys a sense of existential emptiness, yet giving a sense of formality and rigidity beneath its veneer of happiness. And the second was painted 3 decades later. The luscious tangible details that lacked traditional oil painting. Next slide. Only the painter remains and his face is the most detailed area of the painting. All that is left in the painting is a question of existence. Thank you.
There's Nandita, and I'm going to continue with the 7th chapter. Next slide. In chapter 7, Berger turns his attention to giving advertisement images, especially and more generally, the path images, in which we all be seated. We have more images coming, being put all around us than at any time to do it with the man history. Giving an advertisement trades off his desire for what another has, and those desires it can put ideas into the head of persons in general. An ideas-based future, bit of business, but with little relation to material fact, with which a thing really has. Next slide. You're observed with interest, but you do not observe with interest. If you do, you will become less enviable. Being envied is a solitary form of reassurance. A new concept of glamour type of social envy is substituted for moral value. Next slide. Berger sees joy of being envied by others as substitute of Waker's feeling of ownership in an oil painting. Next, please. This industrial society, which has moved towards a democracy and then stopped halfway, is the ideal society for generating such an emotion. Glamour cannot exist without personal social envy being envy, a common and widespread emotion. Thank you.